Okay, week 8. Here we go. Week 8. Innovation of the week. Let's do this. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible. Okay, so the innovation of the week. What are we looking at here? Hit play. So there are a lot of people who are paralyzed. I don't read Japanese. Maybe some of you understand what's going on here. But there are a lot of paralyzed people living all over the world. And instead of trying to mainstream or normalize these people's, try to pretend that they're they're not paralyzed. What this guy did was he gave them the ability to control robots through that tube, right? So they blow into the tube, and so these robots go to work at a cafe, and they take orders from customers, and then they serve the customers. You see, and all of these robots are being controlled by the person who's paralyzed in her bed. Okay, so you don't have to, right? There's the person that's in bed, and she gets to interact with customers, with other people who otherwise she never would have been able to interact with, because she's able to operate a robot. Now, keep in mind that this is one application of this kind of technology, but think about it. You could use this for lots of different things. You could be in a different country and work at a factory that's located in a different country. You don't have to do work visas. You don't need to immigrate. You don't have to emigrate anymore. You can just simply work from your home in a factory that's in another country, right? So basically, you can think of all different ways of applying this kind of technology. All right, so that's the innovation of the week. I thought it was pretty cool, where you can use modern technology to try to and use it that was used for one function and adapt it to be used for people who are otherwise, don't have any options. Okay, midterm progress grades are due this week. And so the way that's going to go down is that I'm just going to give everyone a satisfactory, unless you are continuously failing the quizzes. I don't think anyone has done that. I think people have gotten one or two that are pretty bad, but otherwise, you're pretty much passing. People who haven't done discussion board posts, I'm going to assume that you're going to do at least a few of them before the end of the semester, in which case then you won't be in danger of failing either. At the most, you would only lose 20 points anyway. Let's see. So, right. So I'm just going to basically just glance at the grades, and if someone's consistently getting bad grades, remember too, I have that spreadsheet where you can calculate your grade. You can just download the spreadsheet and just plug in your numbers or where you think you're going, and then you can kind of guesstimate what your final grade would be. Okay. A couple of now I want to address some of the things that came up in the discussion board last week. Okay, and so a couple of places I said, a few places I said, oh, you love your box, and that kind of went sideways, and the reason is because and where I said my perspective when I said that was from based on week 3. Week 3 regulations is one of the sides of the box, which if that's your side of the box, that's something that you love, fine. But making it a regulation means that now I have to live in your box, right? You're trying to put your box uh, around me, right? That's what a regulation does. So personal beliefs, personal opinions, that's on you, right? And I have lots of personal opinions. I have lots of boxy type restrictions that I impose on myself, but I don't share them. I haven't really talked about them at all in this class, and so for the most part, a lot of people don't know what I believe. A lot of people don't know, aside from I'm anti-government, right? A lot of people don't know really, what I believe, because I make a point not to talk about it. Okay, and so my box is for myself, and because I'm not advocating for certain regulations, it's just for me. It's something that I impose, restrictions that I impose on myself. However, if you do try to legislate your morality, your belief, then you're basically saying that everyone should live in that box. Okay, so it's not about me disagreeing with you. I'm just pushing back against the regulation thing. Now, why? Because people don't realize that regulations lead to a lot of the issues 20 or 30 years later that people will call sexism, racism, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Now, a couple of things that you got to know is I used to be a big proponent of regulations. That's why I was an angry Asian guy. I saw racism everywhere. But then after you do your deconstruction, you realize that a lot of the things that we perceive as racism or sexism or whatever has its source in some regulation. Okay. Because of some regulation that did not come from the people, right, but that was imposed by the government, weird things begin to happen. Now, it should stand. Well, I'll mention in passing that not only was I former angry Asian guy, but I would also tell people, see that so regulations and rules from the government are not really necessary, right? Because most of us will try to do what is safest. And if we're not sure, we'll do research before we do something crazy like wingsuit flying or something like that. And now I used to be an honors program professor, right? And it was kind of prestigious for professors to teach for honors, right? Because you had to be picked, right? It's not anyone can do it. You're supposed to be really, really good. And so I taught honors for a couple of years. I got the worst reviews from honor students, like 90% of them. And the reason is because they're honor students. Honor students are honor students generally, mostly, because they're really particular about their grade. And to make sure that they have the highest grade possible, they pretty much go over the syllabus, they memorize the syllabus, and they figure out where they need to spend most of their time. This isn't worth as much, so I don't have to spend as much time on that, spend more time on this, etc. So they schedule out and map out their entire semester. They want to graduate and get jobs in government. They want to become part of the bureaucracy because they realize they can make a lot of easy money that way, right? And they get those big fat pensions, which we'll talk about maybe later. But pensions are horrible, especially if you understand how they work and who pays for them and what they're worth. Right? It would just make you so angry that government workers get pensions, that a lot of teachers get pensions, and pretty much no one else does, right? Pensions is a government thing. That's why it's it's so lucrative. Anyway, it's so good, right? Because of course they're going to give it to themselves, but most private companies can't afford it. They're so expensive. Okay, so the story that I told them, which got me kicked out of honors, right? Because I made them so angry. The whole class just started like rebelling against me. It was crazy. I said, look, imagine you're on a road and it's the middle of the night. It's a 2-lane road. You have one lane going this way. You have another lane coming this way, right? And you're driving on the road. It's the middle of the night. It's dark. Okay. You're tired and you just want to get home. All of a sudden you see headlights coming at you, right? So what are you thinking? The headlights are coming at you and they're coming closer and closer. What are you thinking? What's going through your mind? Is it like, I've never been on a head-on collision at night going 60 miles an hour. So tonight's the night. Let's do it. Let's have a head-on collision. Probably not, right? So 2 cars, they pass. Probably what you're thinking is, well, I better stay in my lane. And I hope that dude over there stays in their lane so we don't have a head-on collision. Now, I said, you don't stay in your lane because it's the law. You stay in your lane because you want to get home safely. So the double yellow line in the road, right, that says this is your side and this is their side, that double yellow is just, it doesn't even really have to be there, right? You just have to, right? It's just a mental thing because you want to get home safely. And they all went crazy. It's like, no, you stay on your side of the road because it's the law. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. But that's how honor students think, right? They're so stuck in that box that they just can't think of any other alternative. I mean, you should, when I started talking about patents and intellectual property, that all of that is bunk, they just simply really lost it. They were like, how am I supposed to make money? You know, that's, which is pretty crazy, right? So I never taught honors after that semester. But understand that they want to be the bureaucrats. They want to control your life because you're too stupid to live your life and make decisions for your life. And so they're going to go into government so they can write rules so you live your life right? That's their objective. And yeah, it was pretty obscene. But nevertheless, I mean, you probably know people in the honors program. Let's just keep it between us, right? All right. Let's talk about race, a couple of things. So loving your box in connection to that. And so regulations lead to complaints of racism. People never see the connection because sometimes the regulations happened so long ago that people have forgotten, okay? So first of all, let's reiterate that in a free society, slavery cannot exist. And I gave you those two examples a couple of weeks ago. Free societies, one of the first things they did was they abolished slavery. It was like, you can't have slaves in a free society, okay? So America, not a free society if they had slaves, okay? Well, we talked about that. But you can codify, legitimize, legalize racism through the legislation of morality. I'll give you an example. The 1910 Flexner Report, the 1910 Flexner, if you're pre-med, you'll probably learn about this, or if you get into med school, you learn about this. But the Flexner Report was credited to be that the basis, that study that was made that led to legislation which propelled medicine in America into the 20th century, right? It used to be archaic, like snake oil peddlers everywhere. But because of the Flexner Report, they were able to write legislation, which then made hospitals, medical schools, 20th century advanced. Obviously, you know that after half a semester with me, you know that that's danger. That's clear sign that something terrible is about to happen. Okay. So the Flexner Report is celebrated in the medical field, obviously, because it created a barrier to entry. It meant that fewer people can become doctors because a lot of the medical schools at the time were shut down as a result of these regulations, including the 10 medical schools that accepted Black students. Okay. So in other words, at the time, you would think around 1910, not that long after slavery, and because of racism, that no one ever would have accepted Black students into their schools. Oh yeah, they did, right? There were 10, in fact, that accepted Black. So you had Black doctors, which really bothered, apparently, some people connected to the government. And so using the Flexner Report, they said, well, you must have this, 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 this in order to qualify to be a real hospital, to be qualified to be a real medical school. And so a lot of schools which just could not afford to have those amenities had to shut down, right? Because they were not up to code. This should remind you of the sweatshop thing, okay? So you're trying to get rid of the competition. And so what do? You say, they're not up to code. They're not a real medical school. And so what you do is you force them to shut down. So the 10 medical schools that accepted Black students and women, I believe, were shut down, which meant that there were no more Black doctors. You understand? Which always made me wonder, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I wondered, we learned about George Washington Carver, we learned about these scientists, these geniuses, these inventors. Where were the doctors? Was it only one? And so it always bothered me, and no one ever really talked about it. And so when I read about the Flexner Report, then I was like, that's what it was. And so basically, it was sold to people as a way of standardizing medical care to make sure that you are safe when you go to a hospital, which didn't do that at all, right? It basically just, everything stayed the same and you just shut down all of these other schools. Now, did people know that they were going to shut down these medical schools that accepted Black students? I think so. I think they knew. But a lot of people didn't. They supported it because they wanted better, safer medicine, safer hospitals. And so they supported it without realizing that they were actually legalizing discrimination, legalizing racism. And that's why, in my mind, you can't really support any kind of legislation that comes from the government down. If it comes from the people, if the people rise up and they say, oh, hospitals, they should, right, the people in the hospital itself say, we should start washing our hands before we operate on people. Good idea. Let's do it. From now on, before you operate, you should scrub and wash up. Now, if a hospital makes that decision on their own for their workers, more power to them. But when the government comes along and says, do this way, period, then you have all sorts of infections, staph infections, people doing all kinds of crazy things because it's from the government. Okay. So I'm always anti-regulation. And so if someone comes out really strong in favor of certain regulation, then it's going to create certain problems, such as the wedding cake scenario. Let's just say you walk into a Christian bakery and you say, bake me a wedding cake for my gay wedding. And from what I've read, the baker said, I'll bake the cake, but you can decorate it anyway. Like the figurines. When they say decorate, they just mean put the little figurines on top. Say, we'll bake the cake, we'll decorate everything, but in terms of the figurines, you guys can handle that. I won't do that, right? And so that became the whole they won't bake a cake for me scenario. And that maybe some people too, because there are lots of bakery stories, right? When you Google it, there are lots of different, and you begin to realize that people start doing this all over the country to sort of foster this outrage thing. And so they say, oh, if a customer comes in, you have to do what they tell you to do. You have to serve them, just like you would anyone else. First of all, if you are going to coerce and piss off the person who's making your food, you really need to think about this, right? If I'm making your food and then serving it to you, because I've even had friends who worked at restaurants, and if a customer pissed them off, they would do nasty things to their food before they served it, right? You wouldn't know, right? And I'm talking nasty, nasty. And you don't want to do that, right? Not that this Christian baker would have done that, but to force the person to make that cake, you would say, see, that's for equality. But probably you didn't imagine that some bakeries are owned by Jewish people. And let's just say that a bunch of bald white dudes come into your Jewish bakery and they said, we're celebrating Hitler's birthday tomorrow. Bake us a cake. You have to, by law, bake that cake for me, right? That's what happens. See, people might say, oh, I don't mean that. Well, of course you didn't, but that's what happens. Regulations never take into account situations where it could also apply. And no one in their right mind would say, yeah, you have to bake that Nazi cake. Who would ever say that you had to do that? But that's in effect what you're doing, which is why you want people to basically have a choice. Look, if that bakery is not going to make the cake to spec, then there are plenty of other bakeries that are dying for your business. They would totally do it for you. Okay. And so that's what I'm talking about, right? When we write regulation, generally people do not imagine, or they don't think about those situations which would later on become problems that could be called racist. Okay. And so what you want is the market just to take care of these things through the market without any kind of legislation. And I've had to learn these lessons the hard way. I've used to try to jam my beliefs onto other people, and I wound up hurting a lot of people. And never, the whole time I was thinking, no, I'm right. I know I'm right. And then because I'm in ministry and I'm supposed to be helping people, when the result turns out to be completely horrible, it really makes you think, right? And so that happened a couple of times. And I said, dude, I am doing something horribly wrong. I need to figure out what's going on. And that started this journey Took me, I guess, 10 years to figure out that, yeah, there's more to this story, that it's a little bit more complex than I think. And I'm talking 10 hard years, okay? But I finally worked it out and I presented it to you last week. One thing that also came up last week was, oh, one more story. Yeah, okay, one more story. One semester I had this girl who came from Georgia, not Georgia, southern state of America, Georgia, south of Russia, former Soviet state, right? But Georgia. And so, she emailed me, and then she showed up in class, and I thought, this is really interesting. This is a perfect opportunity. I'm going to, and I let her know what I was going to do. But and she's blonde, blue-eyed girl from Georgia. She was on a track scholarship, or I don't know, some scholarship thing. And so I asked her. I said, "Hey, so if you were to self-identify, uh, how would you identify yourself? Like white or?" And she says, "I'm Asian, duh." Craziest thing, right? Because Georgia is in Asia. And so she just totally matter of fact said, "I'm Asian. What's your problem?" And people were just like, what? No, but she's blonde and has blue eyes, and how does that work, right? And that's what I'm talking about, right? What is Asian? What is white? What is black? I mean, really, these categories are so problematic, right? And so once you start writing legislation based on anything, there are going to be situations where you're going to be thrown for a loop. So always, we want to stay away from that kind of legislation. One more thing, just so you know, Washington D.C. is the most expensive school district in the country. They spend about $30,000 per student. It is also one of the worst testing districts in the country, which makes it, in my mind, the worst school district in the entire country. It is the only school district that is directly controlled by the US federal government, which is why they can spend $30,000 per student and still be awful. Lower Marion, in contrast, Lower Marion is one of the wealthier, like, what's it? That guy, basketball. He died, not Kobe Bryant. He went to Lower Marion. Okay, one of the wealthiest school districts, if not the wealthiest in the Philadelphia area. At least that's what people told me. They spend $7,000 per student. Okay, so the impression that a lot of people have is that rich neighborhoods have lots of money for their schools. Poor neighborhoods have no money. Philadelphia spends nearly $20,000 per student, and look at their schools. Lower Marion, 7,000. Philadelphia, 20,000. What's going on, right? So it's not about money. People keep saying that, but it's not about money. The federal government, the city government, the state government, they're all kicking money in, and they still suck, right? And it's because of the monopoly situation. Okay, some of you picked up on the fact that I am Corona skeptical. Like, there are certain people that are at risk. I know that for sure. Who they are, no one's really too sure. But I think I'm okay. And so I don't wear a mask. I don't have a mask policy at the church. Anyone can come to church. We don't social distance, okay? And not a single person has got sick. Now, it could be that God's grace protecting us, right? I doubt it. Okay, I don't think it works that way. But I gotta say, you can't get mad at me. Rather, what you should realize is I'm a data point. So let's just say we never wear masks, we didn't social distance, and all of us died. You want that. You want that to happen, because then you can say, "Oh, see, masks and social distancing, that's how you're supposed to do it." They didn't do that, and now they're dead. You want that for more information. But the fact that we haven't done any of that, it's a data point in the opposite, right? It should sort of make you want to re-examine all of the information instead of just listening to the mainstream media who has an agenda. what's really going on. And I think that the story is far more complicated, but lest anyone take me out of context, wear your mask if you are required to, especially by Temple University. I'm going to do everything I can that I don't have to wear a mask. And if they force me to wear a mask, I will start cussing every single lecture that I have to give down at Temple. Like, because I think it's a lot of baloney. I'm not going to get anyone sick, and no one's going to get me sick. So, and I ain't going to die either. Rant over. But anyway, if you really believe in the corona, then you want me to die, right? And that'll prove you right. And I'd be happy to die for your data point, right? But I have a sneaking suspicion that I am not going to, nor will I kill anyone either. My parents are in their 90s and I hang out with them all the time and they are okay. One question also that came up last week was government waste. What is one of the most wasteful examples of government spending? They waste millions here, millions there, billions there, whatever. But the worst, hands down, has got to be the F-35 strategic fighter. Okay, the F-35, which was supposed to be the replacement for the F-18, the F-16, and all those other planes, even the British Harrier jet, right? F-35, they spent over $1.5 trillion on this plane, cutting edge, whatever. It doesn't work. Okay, doesn't work. So we're not talking billions of wasted money. We're talking $1.5 trillion, over $1.5 trillion for a plane that will never see action. Total waste, right? That takes the cake. Okay, so the government is not really there. It doesn't even take care of its own soldiers, treats them like garbage. And believe me, I know a lot of people who are in and out of the military, and they treat you like crap. And they never improve it. Instead, they waste all this money on technology because it's like a boondoggle for government contractors. Okay, so can't rely on government for anything. But if you are corrupt and you want to do corrupt things, then you want to be part of the system. All right, I will see you in the next video.